when we think of something as broad a subject as the world's philosophies, it seems that perhaps we can best look at it in a global or a geographic sense and begin to notice how the geographical features of the different regions of the world have contributed to the fundamental religious and philosophical outlooks of those regions.
Well, I like that approach. In one sense, just as the world is one globe, philosophy is one endeavor in the sense that it tries to make sense out of life and existence. But it is true that peoples are not carbon copies of one another. And these philosophies are spread over the world, and just as you mentioned that the geographical regions differ, so the philosophies that have come out of these regions are also different in a very instructive way, I think.
Mm-hmm. You've written that there are three fundamental, enduring philosophical traditions that have developed on the planet.
That is true. There are three great enduring civilizations. These are the Western civilizations, which includes religiously the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but also Western philosophy. And then there is the South Asian tradition, which stems from India, includes Sri Lanka. And then there's, thirdly, the East Asian tradition, centering in China, but from China, it radiated to Japan, Korea, aspects of Southeast Asia, and Tibet. Mm-hmm. Now, I find that it is very interesting to match up these three great enduring philosophies that have come out of these three regions with the three inescapable problems of human life, which Bertrand Russell once listed. It's not unique to him, that everywhere the people live, they are confronted with first the problem of nature, how to wring their livelihood out of the natural world. Second, the problem of human relationships, how do they get along with one another? And third, how do we get along with ourselves? We can think of these as the natural, the social, and the psychological problem. Now, in relating these to the world's philosophies, the hypothesis that I think we get most mileage out of in terms of illumination is to think of these three philosophical traditions, each one as having accented, so to speak, or specialized on one of these three inescapable problems. Specifically, we in the West seem to have paid more attention to the natural world, to nature, than have the other two. Just in passing, the fact that modern science emerged in the West is one very strong evidence of that fact. East Asia appears to have focused more on human relationships, the social question, and has become, by virtue of that, in its historical period, the world's great social philosopher. The fact that Confucianism, even today, people, historians, sinologists, can't make up their minds whether Confucianism is a religion or an ethic, mm-hmm. because the social aspect is so strong. And then finally, India appears to have concentrated more intently than either of the other two on the psychological question. Who are we? What is our psychological makeup? And has become, by virtue of that emphasis, the world's great introspective psychologist.
Mm-hmm. Now, Huston, you yourself spent your youth in China.
True.
And I think you have some interesting first-hand observations about the relationship of the Chinese people to nature itself, particularly the rivers that would flood. You lived near one such flood, as I recall.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons why the Chinese philosophies did not go as deeply into nature as did the Western is that the natural environment was much less hospitable. For one thing, all but 14%, 86% of China is Rocky Mountains. It's not tillable, and you can't do anything with that. But as you mentioned, I think that the rivers played an even more important part, because China's rivers are unlike those of India or of the West. They originate in the western mountain regions where the soil is of a special consistency that causes it to wash very badly, and the riverbeds build up. So the floods, the rivers of China, they've been called China's scourge. And you mentioned my own relation. It's true, a boy living only 12 miles from the Yangtze during the catastrophic floods of 1932, in which over 1 million people were drowned. Nobody knows how many million died of ensuing famine. So nature was daunting to the Chinese mind. Now, there is a naturalism in Far Eastern thought, but it's the naturalism of the artist and the nature lover and the poet, of the Wordsworth and the Thoreau, not the naturalism of the Galileo and Bacon, where we really get in there and work with it.
I think it's fair to say that since we're talking in the broadest sense about civilizations and planetary philosophies, naturally there'll be many exceptions to the currents of thought that you're trying to draw out. But Taoism is a Chinese philosophy that emphasized nature. But I suppose it's important to say that Taoism, while very important in China's history, never became the dominant philosophy as did Confucianism.
Well, that's true, but even more important is that the Taoist approach to nature is that of the nature lover and the poet and the artist, not that of the scientist. In fact, I remember one of the chapters in the Tao Te Ching speaks very directly to that. It says, those who would take over the earth and mold it to their ways never, I notice, succeed. The earth is like a sacred vessel, so exalted that they reach out their hands and it is gone. See, it's an awe of nature, but not a pragmatic approach to rearranging the balance between the human species and nature.
In the Western religious and philosophical systems, there was more of a sense of distance from nature. We could set ourselves apart, we could observe it and manipulate it.
Very true, very true. And that holds also not only for matter, but also for the other components of nature, which are time and space. It's an evidence of the Western preoccupation with nature that three great concepts emerged in the West and the West only. One is science, as we've mentioned, and that relates to matter, scrutinizing matter and working with it. But the second is the idea of progress. Now, progress relates to time, which again is another component of nature. And the fact that the idea of historical progress arose in the West and in the West only is again one more evidence of its preoccupation with the nature. The other matrix of nature is space. And the Western civilization has had far more space to work with. And there is the adage of the space of the frontier, lots of space, being the breeding ground of individualism. So the third great discovery of the West is that of the individual and his or her rights. So all three of these original discoveries of the West derive from an intense preoccupation with the structure of nature.